Now then guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Bob, and in today's video you'll have to forgive me because I've got a little bit of a cough. A Kalashnikov. Yeah, not my best work, and the jokes aren't going to get any better from here, so let's go. So this is the Chiappa RAK-22. It's a semi-auto AK chambered in 22 long rifle, and whilst these have been out for a little while, you don't see many of them knocking about, certainly not here in the UK, but I've got my dirty northern mitts on it, so let's dive in and have a look at Chiappa's take on the only good thing that communism ever produced. So first things first, this is actually an AK. It's not some crappy pot metal 22 firearm wrapped up to look like an AK. Looking at you, GSG. No, this is 100% an AK. It's made in Romania by Nova Modul, who also make a whole host of other AKs, including the RAK-9. In fact, the RAK-22 shares a lot of parts with the other guns from the RAK lineup, all of which are marketed as kind of cheap, no-frills AKs. And that is fairly apparent when you get hands-on with the gun. So it's built on a stamped receiver, which there's nothing wrong with. Plenty of really good AKs out there built on stamped receivers, but you can see elsewhere on the gun where money has been saved. For instance, we've got a lot of cast parts on the gun, the front trunnion, gas block, sight block, etc. all cast, which again, there's nothing wrong with. Certainly not on a little 22 like this. They're not really going to cause you any problems, but you can see the gun's been built to a price point. So if you're after like a really high quality AK build, this isn't going to be it. But that said, everything is perfectly functional on the gun, and whilst it's a little bit scratched up and dinged now, when I took it out of the box, it was in absolutely immaculate condition. So when I picked up this AK, there wasn't a great deal in the box with it. There was the rifle, two 12-round magazines, which are factory pinned to 10 rounds, but it's very easy to sort that out. You get a user manual, and you weirdly get a 7.62 chamber brush as well, which is about as much use as a cock-flavoured lollipop for this rifle. So let's have a look at the gun in a little bit more detail. And we'll start at the butt, like I know a lot of you Southerners like to do. So we have our steel butt pad, which is attached to our fixed wooden stock. Chiappa have managed to pick the most bland piece of wood for that stock I've ever seen. Honestly, that thing's got all the charisma of one of them cheap office desks that you see advertised online. That is mated into our fixed rear trunnion, and I will say it is absolutely snug on there, really nice and tight, which is good if you need to beat to death some decadent capitalist pigs with it. Moving into the receiver, you can see we've got dimples in all the right places. We've also got our little X and Y stamps on there. Not sure if that donates the gun's chromosomes, but we'll not assume it's gender because it's 2023. We've got our plastic AK pistol grip. It is black on this one, and the rest of it's all pretty much a standard affair. We've got a 2-position standard AK safety, mag release, all that good stuff. Moving forward to our rear sight, which is adjustable. That sits on top of our cast front trunnion. Onto the handguards, made of the same bland wood as the stock. I have noticed as well the gas tube over time has just started to develop a tiny little bit of wobble to it. Nothing serious, nothing that a little bit of shimming wouldn't sort out, but it's definitely there now. And again, forward to our front sight, which is adjustable again. And to the muzzle finally, which is a half B28 UNEF threading, covered by a little indexed thread protector there. Now that's a bit of a deviation from a standard 14x1 AK thread pitch that you'd find on like a full bore gun, but I think that's quite a good move because it means you can use all your other 22 brakes and sound moderators on here without the need for adapters or buying another mod. So I think that's a good move from Chiappa. Now just jumping back on the gun quickly to this top cover and bolt assembly, you will see they are slightly different to those on a centre fire. Obviously this being a direct blowback 22 action, the bolt can be a lot smaller. We don't have a great big gas piston in there or a gas system or anything like that, it's just direct blowback, and the top cover is profiled to suit that bolt. Inside the gun there is also a small polymer buffer which limits the travel of the bolt because it doesn't need to reciprocate as far. And the recoil spring assembly is a little 22 assembly as well. Now, I have noticed on earlier models of the RAK-22, the recoil spring assembly was slightly different. It much more resembled a centerfire AK's recoil spring assembly, but this one's a much simpler design. Not sure why Chiappa have done that. Don't know if they were having problems with it or if this was just easier to make. So that'll have to remain one of life's great mysteries. Also inside the RAK-22, we have a proprietary 22 ejector, feed ramp and barrel, obviously. But other than those 22 internals, this is a fairly standard AK. A bit of a basic bitch, if you will. But there's nothing wrong with that, certainly not for a 22 build like this. And the other great thing about this gun is it's built on the AKM pattern of rifles, so you can swap out all the different parts. You can put grips, handguards, stocks, triggers, safeties, etc. Everything that's built for an AKM will fit this rifle. So, you know, Zenitco, Sure Shot, all that type of stuff. If you want to customize this gun, you can do it to your heart's content. Indeed, I've got some pretty big plans for this little fella, but we're not talking about that just yet. Let's stop the video right there for a minute to talk about Kydex Customs. So Kydex Customs are a UK company offering everything from mag carriers and holsters to shooters belts to optics and accessories. So whether you're shooting PRS competitions or playing airsoft matches, they've got something to cover your LARPing needs. And if you use the code RANGE10, they'll give you 10% off your entire order value. So go check them out, guys. KydexCustomsUK.com. Show them some love. They're doing good things and we appreciate them supporting the channel. Let's get back to the video. So we've looked over the build of the rifle, but how does this thing actually perform? Well, handling wise, other than being slightly lighter than a 7.62 AK, and that's just purely due to the fact it doesn't have a gas piston and it's got a slightly smaller bolt, it unsurprisingly handles like an AK. Your manual of arms is the same. The only real difference is you're shooting 22 instead of 7.62 by 39. So if you're used to handling an AK, this thing will feel very familiar to you indeed. You've got all the usual quirks, the rock and lock magazines, that awkward to reach safety, the tiny little stock which doesn't quite fit you properly unless you're a malnourished 14-year-old Russian conscript. You guys know the drill. So when it comes to AK reloads, I've been practicing two methods. The first would be the reach over, which is like this. And the second would be the reach under, which looks a little like this. So those are the two methods that I've been practicing. However, Matt keeps on talking about doing a third method, which is the reach around. It's all he talks about. Next time we go to the range, we'll try the reach around. I'm not sure what that method is. If you guys know, by all means get down in the comments and let me know. Right then, let's move on and talk about reliability, because that's often a sticking point with firearms that are converted to Fire-22 long rifle. And so far I've put over 1,200 rounds through this. I think it's between like 12 and 1,300 rounds. Mostly CCI Blazer, but I have also used quite a few other different types as well. I've used about 4 or 5 different ammos through it, including some subs, 2 different types of subs. And so far it's been really, really reliable with them. I think I've had, in those 1,200-1,300 rounds, I think I've had like 4 or 5 stoppages with it, all with the Blazer, because that was like kind of 90% of the ammo I run through it was the Blazer. And they were all the same stoppage as well, which was a failure to fully eject. So the spent case would be pulled out of the chamber, it would go to eject, but the bolt would come back and trap it. So I had a couple of stovepipes and a couple of casings completely squashed up against the breech face by the bolt. Not entirely sure what's causing them, because most of the time this thing ejects really positively. It's kind of throwing spent cases a good 2 or 3 meters out the gun. So I've been really pleased with it on that side. If I had to guess, I'd say this thing probably prefers standard velocity ammo to high velocity, which the Blazers are fairly high velocity. So I think they're maybe just running action just a tad too hard, a little bit too fast. Now that's just a conclusion I've come to after shooting several different ammo types through this. This thing was not particularly ammo fussy at all. It ate everything I fed it, including some extremely low-powered Norma subs, which don't run in any of my other semi-autos. So that's what leads me to believe this action's probably tuned for slightly lower-powered ammunition. Now, the manual doesn't say what type of ammunition to run, apart from it needs to be 1,100 feet per second minimum. That's all the manual says. But I would say, based on this gun, that these like probably a standard velocity, not a high velocity. Now, all that said, some of you will have seen the quick look video I put out on the RAK-22 on my channel. And if you haven't, you definitely should do. It's truly a masterpiece of modern filmmaking. But in that video, it was the first shots I took with this gun, and I did have about 4 or 5 stoppages, I think, with a couple of magazines. However, they weren't the factory magazines. They were these modified magazines. This one here is a Black Dog Wasser 22 magazine. They will run in the Chiappa, but they won't fit from the factory. You need to profile them, remove material, etc., just to get them to fit that AK mag. Well, they're designed for a slightly different fitment, but with enough messing about with them, you can actually get them to fit, and they are Obviously YouTube compliant 29 round magazines there, which is a big improvement in capacity compared to the factory 10-12 rounders. However, the first iterations of them, they didn't feed all that well. I was having a couple of stoppages per magazine. But now every magazine I've modified, I've got slightly better with. I've worked out, like, you know, what's causing some of the issues there, and every one of them's fed slightly better, to the point now where the latest one I've made is actually running really reliably. But yeah, just know that I did have a few failures whilst running these magazines in this gun, but I'm not going to hold it against the RAK-22 because those magazines aren't designed to run in this gun. So the factory magazines are actually really nicely built. They're incredibly solidly constructed. They're all polymer, but the feed lips are nice and chunky, so I can't see any issues with those wearing out over time. Yeah, really well built. They run really reliably as well. My only complaint would be that lack of capacity. 12 rounds is just a little bit anemic. So I did also experience another really weird malfunction with this gun. The second to last time I took it out, the top cover would randomly just pop off the gun or just like pop loose on the receiver there. And this was happening, like I say, randomly. I could shoot 50-60 rounds with no issue. Then all of a sudden it'd start happening every other round. Really weird. It popped back on there, absolutely fine. It was installed right, there was nothing like that. At first it kind of left me scratching my head a little bit. But I soon realised what had caused it, and it was actually an issue, a potential issue I'd identified when I first opened this gun up. And the issue was actually caused by that recoil spring assembly that we talked about earlier. So like I said, it's a much simpler design, this one. You've just got your recoil spring with a straight guide rod, and it's captivated. And it's actually captivated using a circlip on the guide. And what happens on this gun is when the bolt comes forward, it has a tendency to just clip that circlip just to kind of knock it slightly. The gun's always done it from new. It's never been an issue, but for some reason this range trip it turned into an issue. I'm not sure why. Maybe I disturbed something when I was taking the gun apart, which I was doing quite regularly to inspect parts and look it over. Maybe it had just worn to the point where it started catching a little bit more. But basically what was happening was, as the bolt was coming forward, it would hit the circlip, and instead of just overriding it and carrying on its travel, it would push the circlip and the entire recoil spring assembly forward slightly, which has the effect of essentially pressing the takedown button for a split second, causing the top cover just to jump off. So yeah, really nice, easy, quick fix. I just nipped that circlip back up and it's been absolutely fine since. So yeah, that's a bit of a stranger issue to have with a gun. Not the end of the world, nice easy fix, but yeah, I thought it was definitely worth mentioning since it did happen. Like I say, I've only got a sample size of one, so it might just be this gun. I don't know, it might be an issue with all the new guns. If you do have a Chiappa, whether it's an older one or one of these newer ones, and you've had any experience with that, whether it's caused you issues or whether it's run smoothly, get down in the comments and let me know. I'd be definitely interested to hear what you guys have to say about it. And just quickly guys, while we're talking about reliability, I will say I ran this gun suppressed about 50% of the time with supers and subs, and it caused no issue whatsoever. Does throw a little bit more shit back into the action, but not enough to cause an issue. And this being an AK, it's got loads of open space in there, loads of air gap to vent all that crap out. So I didn't notice the gun gumming up any more than it normally would, which is quite nice actually. Sometimes when you run guns with tighter receivers, ARs and things like that, you can really notice when you're running suppressed, they tend to come up very fast, but not the AK. It just keeps on going and chewing through it. So yeah, pretty happy with the Chiappa so far in terms of its reliability. Other than that small handful of failures to eject, which, like I say, I could probably sort by running a different ammo through the gun, and that weird circlip issue. I've noticed no other kind of strange parts wear on the gun. There is wear marks appearing, but it's where you'd expect on the guide rails, etc. There's no other causes for concern that I've identified so far in like what, 1200, 1300 rounds, whatever. But obviously only time will tell, but so far it definitely seems like a runner. So one of the questions I've been asked most about this gun is, can you slav squat with it? Yes, yes you can. No problem. So let's move on quickly and talk about accuracy. So I did run the gun in its stock configuration like this with the iron sights, which are perfectly serviceable. There's nothing wrong with them. They're fully adjustable and all that, but they are quite coarse. Anyone who's shot like factory AK iron sights will know what I mean. They're not the most precise out there. You're always going to be more accurate with an optic. However, I did do a little bit of group testing, didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I shot five round groups at 50 yards and they were all coming in about 5 or 6 inches. So not great, but I'm sure you'll be able to tighten them up with an optic. But you've got to understand that's, you know, factory irons with this big daft northern monkey hanging off the trigger. So whilst we're talking about accuracy, I suppose I should mention the trigger. And what can we say about the trigger in a RAK-22? Well, it's definitely got one, you know, it's definitely a trigger. I wouldn't say it's the worst trigger on a rifle I've ever shot, but it's not doing much to help its case. So the trigger pull is heavy, it's stagey. In fact, we'll pull it, we'll do a Garand thumb, we'll pull it. So yeah, it's essentially a 2-stage trigger. The first stage, it's a little bit kind of almost gritty to it. You hit your wall, I'd say right about kind of 4 pounds-ish, and that's basically where your trigger's hitting your disconnector. Then you pull through that. I'd say you've probably got a 7, maybe an 8 pound let off. And the reset's also not great, it's quite a long reset there, and then again, it's tactile and it's audible, but yeah, it's just not great. You've got a lot of pull through on it as well. So yeah, not great. There is also quite a lot of slop in all the trigger components. The hammer and disconnector and everything all move a good millimetre or so laterally in the gun, which doesn't breed consistency. I'm also not personally a massive fan of the trigger bow. It's very, very bent. I prefer mine a little bit straighter. But that said, it is a cheap factory AK trigger. You know, it's perfectly serviceable. It does what it needs to do. It's never caused me any light striking issues or anything like that. No one's buying this gun and expecting to get a super honed trigger in there, are they? So whilst it's not going to be the most accurate 22 out the box, certainly not on its standard configuration, you know, you slap an optic on this, possibly even a slightly better trigger, those group sizes are going to come down considerably. They'll be more than acceptable for mini rifle, even small game hunting, whatever you want to do with a gun. So final thoughts on the RAK-22. Well, I actually really like it. Sure, it's not the best quality AK out there, but it's fairly solidly built for the most part, and more importantly, it seems to work. Yeah, it's not perfect, but for a factory new gun in 22, I don't think it's been bad at all. And I think with a tiny bit of fine tuning, you could have this thing running flawlessly. And it's also something a little bit different, which kind of makes it cool by default, right? This thing's going to stand out at the range in an otherwise bland sea of ARs. And whilst it's not as intuitive or maybe as fast to run as an AR, you have that slightly more difficult manual of arms. This thing is a little bit more finicky. It's a lot of fun to run, and you get major LARP points for it as well, because, you know, being an AK, you can make this your personality, which is something I've been doing for the last few months. And as I mentioned earlier, I've got big plans for this guy. I'm planning on making it 100 times better. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because we'll definitely be doing an update video on the build. It's probably going to be a little bit larpy because I know you guys love that type of thing. So there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts on the Chiappa RAK-22. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Who am I kidding? Of course you have. You've absolutely loved it. So go ahead and smash that like button for me. Make sure you subscribe to the channel as well, so you don't miss out on this kind of quality content being beamed directly into your phones. And as always, guys, I appreciate all your support, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.